Anxiety. Time for bath.
I'm hungry. I'm not feeling good.
So any other symptoms that you're experiencing?
I'm thirsty. My legs hurt.
Okay, go on.
I want to feel weird.
I see.
Mommy, come lay down in my bed.
How do you differentiate between an actual fear
Oh, what is that?
versus something they just don't want to do?
No, I'm not going on test.
And kids' preferences and fears can change.
Papa, I have to clean up all these peanuts. So I have to clean it.
So tell me, what is anxiety exactly? What does it look like?
Really important to differentiate between just anxiety as an emotion and anxiety disorders that people might come to a psychologist or therapy for. But basically, I think of anxiety as having three parts. So the emotional feelings of it, the physiological part of it, so like pounding heart, maybe racing thoughts, maybe you're sweating, maybe you feel really hot or cold, and then thoughts that go along with that. So what kind of goes through your mind when you have those sorts of emotions. And so all of those together is really what I think of anxiety as. It's really like a cue from our bodies that we think something dangerous might be happening.
How young of an age can you experience anxiety?
Actually, babies as young as about 6 months can start to show signs of separation anxiety. And separation anxiety in that context, it's really developmentally appropriate. And then it's pretty typical from about 18 months to 3 years old. So that's kind of when anxiety first comes out. Usually when we're talking about anxiety disorders, again, so when anxiety has really become a problem and it's not necessarily developmentally appropriate, usually that starts more around age 5 or 6.
What are some of the signs that you see in a 5 or 6-year-old that would kind of make you start thinking like, oh, this might be something to look further into?
I think the biggest thing is if kids are avoiding things that other kids their age are doing, or really having a problem with things they need to do throughout the day, going to sleep, going to school, just kind of the typical fun kid things haven't become fun anymore. And it's really getting in the way of family life. It's really causing stress. That's really when I would categorize it probably more as a problem, something to look into.
What are some reasons that children are more anxious than others?
We don't fully know, but
Causes me anxiety. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, I think the other thing too is that we all have anxiety to some degree. It's an emotion that we all experience, but there are some biological factors, some environmental factors that might make it more likely that some kids would be more anxious than others. So environmental factors would be something like something stressful happens. You move to a new house, you start school, someone that you know passes away. All of those can kind of be the tipping point for something to become more of a problem. And then we do know that there's a biological component. So if you have a parent that has anxiety, you as a kid might be more likely to have anxiety. It doesn't necessarily mean it'll be that way, but that might make it more likely. And then just temperament. So kids that tend to be a little bit more inhibited might be more likely to develop anxiety too.
What about ways that parents can help with that anxiety?
So I think parents' most important role is really to be the support person and the cheerleader. So noticing what things are hard for your kid and really kind of breaking it down into small steps that are manageable for them. So if your child has trouble going to sleep by themselves, breaking that down into really small steps. So maybe you're gonna at first stay in their room fully until they fall asleep. And then a few nights later, maybe you're gonna stay for 10 minutes. And then after that, maybe you're gonna stay for 5 minutes until you get it down to you're not in the room at all. I think parents modeling brave behavior is really important. So you can't expect your kids to do something that is worrisome for you too. So really kind of being that model for them. And then drawing a lot of attention to kids tackling things that are hard for them. So, going back to the sleep example, if you have a child that has trouble falling asleep on their own, like they have a really good night where they stay in their bed all night, you make sure to point that out the next morning.
Does that kind of support of drawing attention and breaking things down change as the child grows? Or is there a specific strategy that's better with younger children versus older children?
I think younger children, just because of developmentally where they are, they can't quite explain to you what they're experiencing always. And they also kind of cognitively don't have those worry thoughts that I was talking about at the beginning. And so in that respect, younger kids are going to work a lot more on the behavioral strategies. So just what do we do? For older kids, I would say even 10 and older, you can kind of start to ask them questions more about it. Like, well, what about that makes you nervous? And what ways could we think about that differently? How could we handle that together? And they can kind of do that cognitive piece. So I think that that's kind of the biggest difference in support. And then the other thing is younger kids often display anxiety kind of as behavioral issues. So they get anxious, they don't know what to do with that, and they have a tantrum or they have a meltdown. Sometimes you see teenagers still do that too, but a lot of times with teenagers, it's a lot more internal. And so just kind of paying attention to other signs. What sort of things are they avoiding, or what sort of things are hard for them?
How can you discriminate true anxiety or fear versus them just not wanting to do something?
Sometimes it's really tough, especially with young kids like toddlers and preschoolers. I think it all comes down to the pattern. Is that something that you're seeing over time? And is it in similar situations? So are you seeing those tantrums or meltdowns like right before school or before you're going to have a babysitter? Is it around food and meal times? And just kind of like looking for those patterns and clues is often helpful.
I at least see a lot of kids being anxious around bedtime or napping. Why is that something that causes fear or anxiety in younger children?
I would say most often that has to do with separating from parents. It's really common for kids that have separation anxiety to have sleep troubles. And if you think about it developmentally, that's kind of what they're learning. It's that I am now this individual person away from my parents. And so they can go do all of these things while I'm sleeping or napping. And so I think often trouble sleeping has to do with that. Developmentally, also around like 3, 4 is when kids start to have nightmares and things like that, or worry about the dark. And so those kinds of fears can pop up too. Talking to them about the fact that they're safe, you might ask them what they think they're going to see, like if kids are afraid of monsters. Sometimes having kids be kind of like a superhero to the monsters that's going to battle them is something that's helpful. Specifically for kids that are worried about the dark, I would have parents do different kinds of games with them, like not in their bedroom, but in the dark, where you're really kind of practicing in that situation where they're afraid.
That's such a good idea. Just also a personal thing that I'm going to be doing with my son too. Overall advice for parents.
I think the first thing is if you're worried about anxiety in your kid, then that's probably an indication that it's time to talk to someone about it. Even if that's kind of like a check-in or a consult about, is this something I should be worried about? Or is this something that other kids are going through too? Reaching out for help can be hard. It really is sort of vulnerable experience, but if you're questioning something, for sure, seek help. Anxiety isn't necessarily something that goes away on its own. And then I think trying to take care of your own anxieties, because you can't expect your kids to be calm about something that you're worried about. Hi, yeah, I'm Jacque Bogdanoff. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have a PsyD. It's a Doctor of Psychology degree. My private practice is called Child Behavior Clinic. I specialize in working with kids who have anxiety disorders or young kids who have behavioral problems. So things like tantrums, aggression. And right now I just see families and clients virtually. I also do different kinds of resources online, blogging. I'm hoping to do a masterclass about anxiety soon.